All right, well, good morning, everyone. Hope you had a nice coffee break. It is my pleasure to introduce our next keynote speaker. As Peter said, Bob Dudley, Chief Executive of BP. Bob was among the first industry leaders in the wake of oil's swift collapse in late 2014 to warn of the likelihood of lower for longer prices, and boy, was that certainly the case. The downturn has presented a unique set of challenges to majors like BP, forcing them to rapidly adjust to the realities and pressures of low oil prices, while keeping a sharp eye on the longer-term uncertainties created by the global transition to a low-carbon energy mix. It is that latter challenge that Bob is going to address here today. So without further delay, podium is yours.
Thank you, Casey. So thank you, Casey, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to join the conference again this year. This is a great gathering of our industry, and it's always a good debate. So thank you to Energy Intelligence, the New York Times for the invitation. And let me add my congratulations to Patrick on his recognition last night. And it's been my pleasure to work alongside Patrick on many occasions, including our joint involvement with the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, or something called OGCI. But on to why I'm here today, which is to talk about the energy transition. I'm doing that from a BP perspective, not just because I serve the company, but because we have a lot of history in this area. We've learned a lot of lessons over the years. Our successes, and frankly, more often our mistakes, have informed and shaped BP's broader corporate strategy today. Today, we're focused on our dual mission of delivering the energy that the world needs while advancing the low-carbon world that we all want. Although, as I'll explain, we're pursuing both in a very different way than we once did. And I think a good place to start is 20 years ago, when BP caused something of a stir in the industry. As you may recall, our chief executive at the time, John Brown, gave a speech at Stanford University, home to some of the world's leading research on climate science. John used the occasion to acknowledge the threat of climate change, out loud and in public. And that wasn't all. He confirmed and committed BP to real and meaningful action to help the challenge. It was groundbreaking at the time, and it wasn't just words. We put money where our mouth was, a lot of it. We set a target to bring down our own emissions by 10% by 2010, and we hit that target 9 years early. We set up an alternative energy business and made a number of big investments in solar and hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, wind and biofuels, all part of our commitment to make a difference, and at the same time as making a profit, or so we hoped. After all, a sustainable business has to be profitable. We anticipated that governments would adopt policies that would make low-carbon energy more competitive. Unfortunately, policy changes didn't happen at the pace that we thought or expected, despite the excitement around the Kyoto Protocol and the Earth Summit in Johannesburg. Then came the financial crisis in 2008, 7, 8. A big change of focus for the world, from green energy then to cheap energy. But we stuck with it, although many of our original investments didn't pan out. A couple did, and we continue to invest in them. Today, we're the biggest operator of renewables among the majors. We like our portfolio of wind farms in the United States and biofuels in Brazil. And we continue to invest in those businesses, and they're profitable. But it's fair to say they don't, as yet, make a material difference to the bottom line. 2 decades after John's speech, the world has refocused on the climate challenge, as evidenced by the Paris Agreement. This time, the global commitment to action feels different, and the national pledges are a good start. But frankly, we need even stronger and clearer signals to create the confidence to invest in and grow low-carbon businesses at scale. We think a carbon price is key to that, and we've been calling for it since the late 1990s. Not all agree. But it's by far a better way to go than regulation, which, however well-intentioned, can often distort the market. Thankfully, even without the predictability provided by pricing or policy, technology has steadily advanced on its own, making wind and solar increasingly competitive and more economic than coal in some places. While BP's commitment to lower carbon energy hasn't changed, how we go about our business has. The showcase speeches, the advertising campaigns, and billion-dollar bets of the past have been replaced by quieter but still steadfast commitment to help address the climate challenge, while pursuing lower carbon more organically and in every corner of our business. Our fuels team is producing gasoline that cleans the engine while you drive so your car will go further on the same tank of fuel. Castrol is making lubricants that work harder for longer, with even less friction, making engines increasingly more efficient. Air BP will soon be supplying biojet fuel made out of household waste. Our new upstream facilities are among the best in the world at limiting methane emissions, and across that business, we're focusing on reducing our emissions. In petrochemicals, we're producing something called PTA, with a carbon footprint of around 30% lower than the conventional produced supplies. Target Neutral is a unique service we offer. Over the past decade, it has offset around 3 million tons of CO2, which is the equivalent of taking 1.2 million cars off European roads for a whole year. Our integrated supply and trading team is the biggest marketer of natural gas in North America and is now getting into renewable natural gas, tapping into landfills and farms to capture biomethane produced from organic waste. Some of our most exciting work is in our venturing space. And just one example, we've invested in a company that can produce concrete with between 30 and 70% less CO2. We think it has enormous potential. Most people don't realize that concrete, it is the single most used substance on the planet behind water, and it uses a lot of CO2, emits it. That's all on top of our two major renewable businesses I mentioned at the outset. All told, we are currently working on over 100 actions we're taking across the company in our products that we're producing or efficiency gains to help reduce carbon emissions. So rather than bolting on a whole new series of low-carbon businesses as we have in the past, we're building low carbon to how we work, what we do across our businesses, and ways that will generate value over time. I think we're making smarter, and in many cases, much smaller bets, and making them across a wider range of technologies and business models. We think it's the way to go, given how tough it is, I think, to pick winners in this rapidly evolving space. Through these venturing and partnership activities, we're building our understanding so that we can avoid large speculative investments and instead give ourselves as much opportunity as possible to back the winners as they emerge. It doesn't generate headlines in the same way that a bigger acquisition would, but based on our experience and given all the uncertainties that still exist, we know it to be a sound strategy for us. And we've handed off a number of these venturing opportunities into our businesses to grow and scale up. At the same time, we are just as committed to our traditional oil and gas business. Despite the attraction of renewables, the world can't run on them alone at the moment and won't be able to for some time. Of all the energy used in the world now, 3% comes from renewables. That might go up to 10 or might go up to 30% or more in 2 decades' time, depending on the speed of that transition and evolution. And even if it grows at the slowest predicted rate, that means renewables will penetrate the energy system of the world faster than any fuel in human history, which is remarkable. So renewables are clearly coming of age. And yet, even with the most aggressive forecast for renewables, the world will likely be looking elsewhere for nearly 2/3 of its energy over the next 2 decades. As we all know, that's because global energy demand for energy continues to grow as prosperity increases and the world's population rises, giving us a dual challenge. We must meet the increased energy demand while also transitioning to a lower carbon future. That's something often forgotten here in London, Brussels, or Washington when we're looking at charts and tables discussing what the world should use for heat, light, and mobility. And let's not overlook the economic contribution the industry makes through jobs, investments, dividends, and significant taxes, countries all around the world. Just as the global economy now depends on oil and gas, governments and communities benefit from the revenues they generate. So this need not be to the detriment of achieving the Paris goals to limit climate change. If you take the fastest transition case in BP's energy outlook, which follows the IEA 450 scenario, it projects a share of 48% of the world's energy mix for oil and gas in 2035. That takes into account the importance and assumptions around the role of carbon capture, use, and storage, or CCUS. It takes account of what that will do to achieve deep emissions reductions in the existing power infrastructure and energy-intensive industries using oil, gas, and coal. The OGCI, of which BP is part, has now earmarked around $500 million to accelerate the scale-up of CCUS technologies that are already proven, reliable, and ready. But let's also recognize that oil today is not the same oil in the family car that you had when you were growing up. The engine's not the same either. Technology is having a huge impact on the amount of energy it takes to produce oil and gas and the amount of useful energy we get out of it. In the next couple of decades, the global car fleet is expected to nearly double, going up to nearly 2 billion vehicles. And over that same period, however, we think fuel demand for cars will only go up by about a quarter. So most of that difference is accounted for by gains in fuel efficiency from better conventional engines, from hybrids, and to a small degree from some pure-play electric vehicles. Natural gas is another big lever for lowering greenhouse gas emissions, provided that the methane is contained. You only have to look at the situation in the United States, where greenhouse gas emissions are back down to where they were in the 1990s. As you well know, that's largely because of the shale revolution has produced abundant, cheap gas, which has been displacing coal in the American energy mix. We as a company, we're making a strategic shift to more gas ourselves. And 6 of our 7 new major upstream projects this year are gas projects, with a further 8 gas projects planned by 2020. In fact, we're growing our gas production, I think, more than any other major. Be it gas, oil, or renewables, our focus remains the same. Safety above all else, value over volume, and on being increasingly competitive in the mix of all this exciting change. Let me finish, Casey, by reminding us what society's goal is here. It is to limit warming below 2 degrees C. This should not be about a race to renewables alone. It's about a race to lower greenhouse gas emissions. That's a big lesson we've learned over 20 years. It's taught us to lower emissions. To do that, you not only have to deliver renewables in abundance, you also have to shift from coal to gas, reduce fugitive methane, and deliver oil more efficiently, and make CCUS competitive. We need to do all of this simultaneously, while still fueling the global economy. The expectations on us are greater than at any time I can recall in the industry. People expect us to help drive emissions down further, faster. Proud to say we've been focused on that in BP for more than 20 years. But at the same time, they also expect us to keep the lights on, to keep their homes warm and hospitals open. They expect the freedom to travel, explore the world, or to have the world in the palm of their hand, thanks to the energy that powers their smartphones and internet, it's a given. We've been doing that for more than 100 years, and we're not going to let anybody down. It is our job to deliver what the future requires and also what today demands. And they are not mutually exclusive positions. So we can and we must do both. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much for that. I do have a follow-up question to your comments, but first I did want to ask you about some news that came out this morning, a statement by Iraq's oil minister that said that he had asked you to, quote, quickly make plans to develop the Kirkuk oil fields. So I wanted to ask you if you are discussing this with Baghdad or what the status of that is.
I read that on a Reuters screen this morning. We know Kirkuk well, going back to the very early days of Kirkuk, a long time ago, part of the group that found it. And then we were doing technical advisory work in Kirkuk field till 2015. We stopped that. So I haven't actually read his remarks or heard from him, but there would be a lot to do there. But you probably saw it before I saw it.
Fair enough. Well, to go back to your comments, you made the comment how you have fundamentally changed your approach to renewables and are more taking this, put your hands in many places and get a sense of where the technology is advancing. And certainly we've seen your peers, Total and Shell, kind of do that to the same route. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, do you see this setting it up for you potentially making big acquisitions down the road once we get a sense of what those winners are? Do you think it will more drive your in-house R&D decisions? How might it inform your path?
Well, it certainly drives the in-house R&D work that we have, and we're probably investing more in venturing, probably not as deep as some of the things we've done in the past, but much wider across the spectrum. I think it's too early yet to pick big winners in this area, big bets. Our experiences go a little slow and make sure you know what you're doing. If somebody said today, here's $5 billion invested in these technologies, I'm not sure we would know which ones to do. So we're going to do it wide, and the company will be ready to do that and just be part of this evolution of the energy markets in time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that we heard a lot about yesterday and also in Patrick's comments this morning is this idea of, gas not being a bridge fuel, but actually being a destination fuel, that it needs to be part of the energy mix. But there was also the recognition that the next leg of growth is going to be a lot harder to come by, and that emerging markets need assistance to ensure that demand can be met. And so for BP, how do you see needing to involve yourself in that value chain?
Well, based on what we know today about energy, natural gas, emits half the CO2 of coal. That's good for the environment. But, and there's a big but, we've got to get control of fugitive methane and eliminate routine flaring and some of the other things that are not also good for the atmosphere. But to me, it's not a transition fuel. I mean, if it is, it's towards the end of the century, and who knows what might come after that. But I think it is a destination fuel. Natural gas doesn't have the infrastructure to be able to help make reductions in some areas. So there are some countries where we're exploring and have found natural gas, where we think about building, the pipelines and then be part of infrastructure projects like power projects, for example, to enable gas markets to grow. There are many countries around the world that still do not have reliable electricity or coal, so they burn things like diesel fuel. I mean, these are easy things to be able to make a big impact. And I would hope that some of the multilateral funding agencies, the IMF, the World Bank, others, would also help funding infrastructure that will enable a cleaner burning fuel at the time.
Well, I want to switch gears a bit to your stake in Rosneft. And I mean, certainly the Russian major has undergone a tremendous transformation since you first took your 19.75% stake and has become a lot more aggressive internationally, has made some very material acquisitions. And I'm curious, what kind of say do you have in those decisions based on your position in the board? And then as their kind of strategy changes, how does it influence how BP has to manage your own kind of risk and what you take as an in-house company?
Yeah, the company has made remarkable changes over time. It bought TNK-BP, brought it in with Rosneft, it's made other acquisitions. It has learned a lot about the business processes and things from that. We have a fair number of ex-BP people working in Rosneft. The head of HSE, for example, the head of risk management, and there's a whole series of commercial roles. So I do get to see it. I think it's a company who wants to learn. We stay out of the politics, for sure. But they are a really well-run oil and gas company with lots of potential for further efficiencies to drive into it. They have probably different access to some of the markets in the world, and you do that with counter-cyclical investments in places and can do things I think that other companies can't. But we're very pleased with that investment. What I'm really pleased about is how open they are to ideas, and we have our own joint ventures that we do in Russia, always staying, within the boundaries of any sanctions. But we do joint projects, so it's not just a financial investment for us. We do real operations in Russia as BP.
Well, and along those lines, as you said, you have found opportunities to still invest and expand in conventional resources in Russia. Are you comfortable with the position that you have, or do you see this as a place where you could further grow kind of access to low-cost oil resources?
Well, we, like almost every company, I think, is on a capital diet, so we've got to be really careful where we invest the money and we prioritize things. And Russia, for the projects we've been doing, are competitive within our capital framework. There's extraordinary growth opportunities in Russia, low-cost oil. It's one of the lowest cost producers, a little bit like the Middle East on broad scale in many, many of the basins across Russia. I think it's not a very well understood country, but we're comfortable operating there.
I just have one more question, and then we can open it up to the floor. I know that you have spoken before about this idea that sometimes when people think about kind of shorter cycle oil, obviously tight oil dominates that conversation, but it's hardly the only resource that is being developed and is helping avoid a supply gap up to this point. And I'm just kind of curious, what is your view at this point? Given the amount of investment that the industry is making, are there enough short cycle projects being funded to kind of keep us going?
I don't know the answer to that. I think people translate the short cycle investments into the Permian Basin when they talk about it often. It's obviously a giant oil resource. I think there's still a lot to learn about the Permian. It's not one giant oil field. I think it's quite different in sections and all that. We're starting to see differences in the Permian oil field. So I think it's a question mark. For us, the acquisitions there looked a little bit pricey, so we haven't been involved in that. There are some that say the $2 trillion of investment globally, either canceled or deferred, in oil all around the world is going to catch up with the markets here. And I would say if the Permian doesn't play out to some of the really optimistic projections, we may have a tougher time meeting the world's demands for affordable energy for a period. It is a cyclical industry. So let's see. I mean, literally, you learn something new about short cycle investments, if that means the Permian, almost every quarter. My own view of it changes. So.
Fair enough. All right, well, with that, I would like to open the floor. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Emily Gosden from The Times. Bob, I was intrigued to hear you say just then that if somebody gave you $5 billion, you wouldn't know what to invest it in the low carbon space. Is that because when you look at the opportunities like offshore wind and solar and things today, you literally don't think you could be sure that any of them would be profitable or just not attractive enough returns? I wonder how much you would be willing to invest in them at this point. And secondly, you referenced the kind of old approach that BP embarked on 20 years ago under Lord Brown, which obviously kind of came to be known by the Beyond Petroleum mantra. How should we characterize this new approach?
Yeah, I mean, if somebody said $5 billion, you must invest it, we could go do that. But Emily, I think it's how to do it in a competitive economic way is what we're not sure about. So we continue to look at offshore wind. We see places where it is. To me, for a company like BP, it needs to be of scale to really put lots of emphasis on it. So we haven't given up on those things at all. So we've got teams that are looking at it, evaluating it. And there's lots of the other technologies as well. We were in solar manufacturing, which was a grand experiment. At one point, BP was the third largest solar manufacturer in the world, around 2000. And then that product became commoditized. So now you may see us going back into solar, but more developing projects in solar, combining them with natural gas, because the two combine very well in certain places around the world, as an example. And I think we want to be careful. What Lord Brown said and did was very visionary. The expectations at the time were that the political policymakers were going to develop the framework to move those kind of energies forward, which didn't happen. I mean, that's probably the biggest reason at the time. So I would say that the evolution of the energy markets is going to take decades and decades and decades. All the numbers show that. So do you call that beyond petroleum? I mean, we're thinking way out there, and we're thinking beyond petroleum. It's not really a logo statement for us, though. But we have lots of people working on this and resource. And our shareholders want to know we are committed in studying this and we'll be ready. Electric vehicles, for example, charging points, we do that in Europe. And we're planning new places around the world to do both. It's important for us to be engaged across the whole spectrum right now, but we just don't know the answers yet. Our capital, we've had our own special circumstances the last 5 or 6 years. The cost of the accident we had in the Gulf of Mexico, the ticket price for that is now $65 billion roughly, for fines, penalties, legal actions, and the cleanup itself. I mean, that's an enormous amount of money, which has driven a huge amount of discipline into how we spend our money.
Any other questions out there? Oh, yes.
Annie.
Oh, Mike's right for you there.
Mr. Dudley, you used a phrase that we're on a diet in terms of capital expenditure, manuscripting by the way, Bloomberg. Are we at peak diet?
Are we at peak diet?
Not just for you, but for the industry, Bob, because you flagged up very clearly the challenge in terms of the capex reductions that we've seen. Are we at peak diet?
I don't think so. And the reason is, we began to believe that $100 oil was the new world normality going forward. And of course, it plunged to $27 a year. It's 57 and 58 right now. Not that I check it every minute, but it's pretty close. We used to sanction and make money in the oil and gas industry, and just the upstream, at $25 a barrel, $20 a barrel, $25 a barrel, and up. We sanctioned projects. We have a big one in the Gulf of Mexico called Thunderhorse, massive project. It was sanctioned at $16 a barrel, and that is not that long ago. So our industry is going through a great, massive change in the cost structure. It's actually healthy. I think $100 a barrel is not healthy. $20 a barrel is not healthy. But I think if we get it in here, I think the break-even costs of oil and gas companies are going into the 40s and the 30s today. So it's not peak diet yet. Forces a lot of discipline in what the industry does.
Well, I'll actually ask a quick follow-up to that, because I know one of the things that you had mentioned a while back is that you thought that it took about 2 years for costs on more major projects to kind of cycle through. I mean, where do you think that we are in the bottoming out process of that?
Well, Bernard spends about 85% of BP's capital there in the upstream. We do continue to see costs come down. We're recycling some projects. We're looking at them. We're in the middle of certain projects where the costs still come down. Steel costs are down, rig costs are down, there's a big oversupply of rig cost. There is a lot of expertise out there in the industry, so there's not a labor shortage. And this still puts lots of stresses around the industry, but they are continuing to come down. But not only the capital, but the operating costs, and there's pressure, not pressure, there is the impact of new technologies, the big data use, reservoir evaluations, seismic work. The cycle time of what the industry is doing is shorter and shorter and shorter, and we're doing it with less people around the world. And that's going to roll through in terms of a cost structure as well.
Makes sense. All right. Well, with that, we are out of time, so please join me in thanking Bob for his time.
Thank you, Casey.
Thank you very much.